Armistice Day was originally described as a day to be dedicated to the cause of world peace and to be thereafter celebrated. Imagine how they felt on this day in 1918. The relief that it was all over, intermixed with a sense of loss from the carnage that was this war. They were celebrating the peace and at the same time honoring the sacrifices of the fallen. My name is John Jadriv. I'm the current president of Local 161 Veterans for Peace. Today we attempt to reclaim some of the feelings that expressed the armistice of 1918. But first, thanks must go out to our partner group, Peace Iowa, who planned a Remembrance Day observance and subsequently merged with us, referring to our history of holding an Armistice Day. It was through their initiative that David Swanson agreed to address us after the ceremony. David is an author, activist, journal, radio host, co-founder and executive director of World Beyond War, and campaign coordinator of Roots Action. Please stay with us after the ceremony to hear his remarks.
Don, what time do you want assembly?
Right now.
Now?
Yep. Our bugler, Ross Porch, will sound assembly. Here's our program in a nutshell. Opening remarks and bugle assembly by Ross Porch, which you have just heard. A statement by Mel Sackler of Peace, Iowa. Mel, can you unmute yourself and speak to us? While we're waiting for Mel, perhaps Ed Flaherty will read a poem by Wilfred Owen.
Good morning. Wilfred Owen was an English soldier in World War I, a poet. His poem Dulce et Decorum Est is probably recognized as one of the most poignant of the poetry to come out of that awful war. Dulce et Decorum Est, for those of you who aren't up on Latin, is it is sweet and proper to die for one's country. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and toward our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshed. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling. fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth corrupted lungs, bitter as the cud of bile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori.
Thank you, Ed. You know, today is Veterans Day nationally, and you've probably seen this Kurt Vonnegut quote from Breakfast of Champions, his celebrated 1973 novel floating around social media. This is an article from The Atlantic, November 11th, 2014. These are Vonnegut's words. So this book is a sidewalk strewn with junk, trash which I throw over my shoulders as I travel in time back to November 11th, 1922. I will come to a time in my backwards trip when November 11th, accidentally my birthday, was a sacred day called Armistice Day. When I was a boy, and when Dwayne Hoover was a boy, all the people of all the nations which had fought in the First World War were silent during the 11th minute and the 11th hour of Armistice Day, which was the 11th day of the 11th month. It was during that minute in 1918 that millions upon millions of human beings stopped butchering one another. I have talked to old men who were on battlefields during that minute. They have told me in one way or another that the sudden silence was the voice of God. So we still have among us some men who can remember when God spoke directly to mankind. Armistice Day has become Veterans Day. Armistice Day was sacred. Veterans Day is not. So I will throw Veterans Day over my shoulder. Armistice Day, I will keep. I don't want to throw away sacred things. Armistice Day was a hallowed anniversary because it was supposed to protect future life from future wars. Veterans Day instead celebrates heroes and encourages others to dream of playing the hero themselves, covering themselves with valor. In a few moments, we'll ring the bell. Until that time, maybe, just maybe, Mel Schlachter is here and will unmute himself and address us. We don't know where Mel is, but thank you for your patience. David Hempel, who sits on the board of both Veterans for Peace and Peace Iowa, can say a few words in his stead.
I have a few quotes I could read in lieu of the fact that we've lost Mel temporarily. Here's a few from a book that Smedley Butler wrote. Smedley Butler was one of the most decorated U.S. soldiers in history. He fought in World War I. But later on, he became a very big peace advocate. He wrote a book called War is a Racket. Here's some quotes from that book. War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. War is a racket. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. War is a racket. I suspected I was just part of a racket at the time. Now I am sure of it. Like all members of the military profession, I never had an original thought until I left the service. My mental faculties remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of the higher ups. And there's a thought that Malala Yousafzai said a few years ago. She said, "Let us bring equality, justice, and peace for all. Not just the politicians and the world leaders. We all need to contribute. Me, you, it is our duty." Here's a quote from Albert Einstein. "The world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it." And finally, a couple of quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. "I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of nuclear annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and for justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders on our doors. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight."
For those of you who are stuck in the waiting room, my sincere apologies.
No worries.
Please remain with us while we ring the bell, honoring the peace that is unfortunate that we do not have today. In the words of Pema Chodron, if we want there to be peace in the world, then we have to take responsibility when our hearts and minds harden and close. We have to be brave enough to soften what is rigid, to find the soft spot and stay with it. We have to have that kind of courage and take that kind of responsibility. That's the true spiritual warriorship. That's the true practice of peace. Events like this provide an opportunity to explore those soft spots and practice the peace within that those spots offer. concludes our ceremony. Please stay with us for David Swanson. Thank you all. David, would you unmute yourself?
I'm sorry?
It's all yours. Thank you so much for your patience.
So I should speak for a little while and then questions and discussion if we have time?
Sure, that would be fine. Take as much time as you want.
Okay, well, that might be more time than people can stand.
Well, I happen to know that you have another event in an hour.
Do I? Oh, I do. Not a big one. I have one with the Milwaukee people in 8 hours. So some thoughts about where we are in this election that I've written down, and then maybe we can discuss, and you all can set me straight. I'm, by the way, an associate member, an advisory board member, and long ally of Vets for Peace. In June of last year, Joe Biden promised some wealthy so-called donors that nothing would fundamentally change. Right now in this country, millions and millions of people, from those who've been shooting off fireworks to those who've been ranting as if they might soon shoot up some public spaces with their MAGA hats on, seem convinced that everything will fundamentally change. I think Biden was wrong and everybody else is right. Either everything will fundamentally change for the better, or one or both of the twin dangers of environmental and nuclear apocalypse will change everything for the worse. So what should someone who cares about ending war think and do? How do we get from this excitement and joy of electing a warmonger to mobilizing people to end war? How do we talk with people who are celebrating, and how do we talk with people who are outraged by the fraudulent election? With those who are celebrating, I see no reason to oppose their joy and happiness. I happen to love joy and happiness, as long as the people who have it can work hard while they're celebrating. The trick, of course, is that working hard implies that a holy and infallible emperor has not been enthroned, that something more is needed. The trouble is that with lesser evilism, upon selecting a lesser evil candidate, people often adopt the position that their candidate is actually good and great and glorious, that in fact it's part of their duty only to learn good things about their candidate. So one thing we could try is reminding people of the wisdom of their lesser evil election choice in a manner that restores to their consciousness exactly how evil that lesser evil choice was, or even better, how evil a society is that only gives us such choices. It may help to tamp down the offensiveness of any truth-telling about Biden to speak about representative government, about the ideal, if not always the reality, of electing officials who move their positions in response to public demand. It's our role to move Biden, not because he's Biden, but because he's president-elect. It would have been our role to move Bernie, too. But before we're allowed to do any of that, I think we have to gain legal standing. We have to qualify to speak. And to do that, we need to explain to people at some length how aware we are of how bad Trump is and how delighted we will be to be rid of him. Because there is a common understanding that there are two types of beings in the world, the Biden supporters and the Trump supporters. And as soon as you utter a discouraging word about Biden, you are instantly transformed into a maskless, mouth-breathing minion of the moronic one, unless you preface it with various facts about Donald Trump and your feelings about him. Another reason, though, is that the corporate media has sometimes portrayed Donald Trump as a peacemaker and peace as a threat to all that is good, including, rather bizarrely, to peace. And this logic has made enemies of Trump into fans of NATO and the CIA and foreign bases and a Cold War with Russia. So we have, extra motivation to unravel this nonsense. I mean, Trump, the peacemaker, and Biden, the socialist, were far and away my two favorite candidates. If either one of them had been real, I would have worked for him. Now, if your record is anything like mine, you should be able to succeed in gaining standing to talk about Biden. I worked for Trump's impeachment for numerous clear-cut offenses since before his inauguration. I'm now pushing to see him prosecuted for various political offenses that were also criminal offenses, which appear to include incitement of violence, violent violation of immigration laws, election fraud, tax fraud, obstruction of justice, refusal to comply with subpoenas, proliferation of nuclear technology, illegal departure from the INF Treaty, and of course, various wars, coups, and murders by missile. Trump spent 4 years creating, along with Congress, record military spending, record drone killings, escalation of numerous wars, major base construction, major nuclear weapons construction, and threats to use the things, unprecedented shredding of disarmament treaties, heightened hostility with Russia, with a big assist from the Democrats, more weapons in Europe, more weapons on Russia's border, larger war rehearsals in Europe than we've seen in decades, record weapons dealing around the globe, greater military spending, greater investment in NATO by its various members, and of course, no end to the war on Afghanistan that Trump promised to end 4 years ago, or to any other war. This media-induced specter of Trump withdrawing all the troops from Europe and disbanding NATO and ending the war on Afghanistan was a fantasy that we should all have supported if real. I mean, Trump, the peacemaker, was a great candidate. Still, the lack of any major new war in the past 4 years is huge and unprecedented, and a trend we desperately need to continue, which might be easier if we're aware of it. So, hip hip hooray, the witch is dead, the prize is won. Why would we now want to stomp on people's joy and happiness? But don't wars and wildfires and floods and the lack of basic resources not stomp on people's joy a hell of a lot more than an honest assessment of what we need to do now? Can't we apply a little lesser evilism to that choice? And aren't we allowed to speak, having qualified ourselves as anti-MAGAites? But what can we say to our MAGA-hatted brothers and sisters? I think we can stand on our record if it's a fair one. When Trump stopped threatening to nuke North Korea and proposed to speak to its leader, and the Democrats freaked out and worked to forbid a single troop ever leaving South Korea, some of us denounced the Democrats for that. And same with the troops in Germany. The Congress, right at this moment, is trying to prevent the withdrawal of a troop from Germany or Afghanistan or Korea. If we can show that we've been for peace, regardless of party or politician, and for peaceful actions, regardless of insane rhetoric and motivations, we may get farther. Most importantly, we should remain respectful and open to collaboration, but not imagine that we actually need to win over 100% of the public. Winning over a majority for peace is not that hard. Mobilizing a good fraction of that majority to engage in the necessary activism to make it happen, that's the trick. Biden Republicans, by the way, seem to be little more real than unicorns. Trump won the majority. Trump won more, a bigger majority, virtually all of the Republicans in 2020 compared to 2016. If Biden Republicans existed, they also probably would not be leading the way on peace activism. I also think it helps us to remember the basic fact that questions about foreign policy, federal budgets, weapons, bases, wars, treaties, international law are virtually absent from elections. So we haven't just suffered through a bitter years-long disagreement over wars and peace, but rather one over the other 40% of the federal budget that pays for everything else. And more than that, over cultural differences that only marginally impact on policies at all. And like most Democrats running for public office, Biden had a website with lots of issue statements, but none on foreign policy. Created all these task forces, but none on foreign policy. To my knowledge, not a single candidate for president ever, with the possible exception of Jesse Jackson Sr., has ever proposed what they wanted the federal budget to look like. So people didn't just vote against Trump because of his foreign policy, or for him because of it, or for or against Biden because of his foreign policy. But Biden does have a record on foreign policy. He was the most important congressional backer of the war on Iraq. The Democrats held the Senate, he held the committee, he controlled the hearings, he pushed every lie, he defended those lies long afterwards. He now lies about all of that. He has been an advocate for wars for decades. The weapons dealers put more money into him than into Trump, and they are now publicly proclaiming that they have nothing to worry about. Based on past behavior, based on recent statements, we can expect Biden, if left to his own devices, to reclaim the military spending record from Trump or come very close to it, to end no wars, to close no bases, to continue to increase the use of murderous drones, to continue to increase the use of secret agencies and special forces, and to continue the increased sales of weapons to horrible governments around the earth. Some of the things Biden will do will require Congress. Others, and some things only one chamber of Congress can control. If just the House of Representatives refused to pass a budget that wasn't reduced by 50% or 10% or 1%, then such a budget wouldn't pass. But there are some good promises that Biden made or almost made, and those should maybe be the first things that we work on making sure he does. And goes a little further, restoring better relations with Cuba. He's got to do that now and actually end the blockade. Ending US participation in the war on Yemen. Congress passed this and Trump vetoed it. Not only did a president finally not start a major war, but Congress finally, after all these centuries, voted to end a war, and the president vetoed it. So we need to actually end the war on Yemen, and beyond that, repeal the AUMF, restore war powers to Congress, and beyond that, effectively build into US politics the criminality of war, which denies the war powers to anybody, including Congress. So this will mean dropping the vindictive measures that Trump has imposed on officials of the International Criminal Court, which have been denounced by 70 nations, the United States' closest allies, Human Rights Watch, all the liberal groups have denounced Trump sanctioning the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Biden needs to undo that and support international law. We need to not just end the war on Yemen, but end the weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. And why not end the weapons sales to all oppressive governments, if not all governments? Why be the weapons dealer to the world? Why have US weapons on both sides of every war? That needs to be extended to numerous countries, including Ukraine, which I think could boost Biden's anti-corruption credentials. And was the Obama policy. There were no weapons going to Ukraine. In general, the decades-long bipartisan practice of arming the world and both sides of most wars should be something we can tackle without partisan rancor. And it should lead into a program of economic conversion, and for that matter, a Green New Deal with actual funding in it. I think the Green New Deal is the best hope of moving money out of militarism, which is the best hope for a Green New Deal. we need to demand that Biden come through on ending the war on Afghanistan. The Democratic Party platform, not that anyone's ever followed it, says we're going to end the forever wars. Biden says he's going to end the war on Afghanistan and bring the vast majority of the troops out of it. I don't know how you end the vast majority of a war, but ending the war, I understand, and we have to demand that.
David.
Yeah.
So, what national mechanism do you want to use to impose your thoughts, or how? Should we all back the Green Party, or what? What do you want to do to implement what you're talking about?
Well, as far as future elections, I was going to get to that at the end of this spiel, but I don't think this is the moment to continue the ridiculous fraud that all people can do is vote in elections or back parties or back candidates and then sit on their rear ends for 2 years and then do it all over again. I mean,
okay, so what do you want to do then?
Yeah, I want to use nonviolent activism, all of the tools that have always changed the world for the better. I want you to hold meetings with everyone you can by Zoom or otherwise and talk to them. I want you to get your local governments to pass resolutions. I want you to lobby your Congress members. I want you to do creative, entertaining events that generate media coverage. I want you to start getting institutions to divest from weapons companies and in the process educate the public about why that's shameful. I want you to get people to join in national organizations, then global organizations that are doing global webinars. So go to World Beyond War and sign the pledge that you want to end all wars, and work with us when we're doing webinars with people from Yemen and getting voices heard by powerful people. Make those voices louder. Work with the people of South Korea and the government of South Korea and the president of South Korea who want the troops out, and push back against the Congress and lobby hard on this president-elect who's proposing a disaster list of nominees for cabinet positions, and demand some better ones. Demand some real change rather than just this very cosmetic alteration. We have to not just have the Iran agreement restored and celebrate that, and you promised and you did it and hooray, but stop lying about Iran, stop harassing Iran, make this the story in the media that the Iran agreement was not to control Iran, but was to control the United States government. And it's done its job, but now the United States government has to comply with it if it's going to put it back in place. And so what tools do we use? We use petitions, we use email campaigns, we use letter campaigns, we use webinars, and to the extent possible, we use marches and giant floats and billboards and disruption of activities. It's possible to get into Congress's webinars. It's possible to get into the weapons bazaars webinars. We have to develop new tools for this new age, but there are new opportunities for new allies in this new age. Everyone interested in proper health preparation for disease pandemics knows where the money is, and we know that a tiny fraction of military spending could have made the United States the best, not darn near the worst in the world at handling the current disease pandemic. So we have to keep building bigger coalitions out of that. There are groups that want a Green New Deal, like Extinction Rebellion, that will work with anti-war groups because they know where all the money is and they know what a disaster militarism is for the environment.
Damn.
Say it again. missed that and I'm not hearing it again. So there are openings, right? The Iran deal, the Paris Agreement, the possibility of restoring treaties with Russia. The New START is going to expire in February, if not. Our friends in Ireland who want U.S. troops out of their airports think we might be able to do it because Biden, thinks of himself as Irish. There are new things that we can try. But the first thing is getting the election behind us, which Trump wants to do everything he can to prevent, and moving forward with serious demands to build a peace movement and insist on peaceful actions out of our governments. There are global targets, corporate targets, and local targets as well. We don't have to just work on the US government, and getting your local governments to divest monies, to pass good resolutions, et cetera, helps build pressure on the higher levels of government.
Did you stop the discussion, or what are you waiting for?
I thought maybe someone else would like to say a few words or ask a question or point out my idiocy. I see Martha raising her hand.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for joining us. I was emailing with you, but didn't get a chance to meet you. I wanted to add something as far as what can we do. This is just something I noticed from the last 4 years. In 2016, Trump was promising to deport millions of people, and he made illegal immigration the center of his campaign, basically. And because of that spotlight, activists around the country were put into action. And now we're learning that Trump actually deported far fewer people, far fewer immigrants than Obama-Biden. And we learned about the cages that were built under Obama and Biden. And if it was because of activism, it was because of the people that we were able to stop those people from being deported. I personally was involved in a campaign that we were getting local sheriffs in Iowa to commit to stop working with ICE, for example. And that was a campaign through the ACLU or ACLU National. And those kinds of things were happening all across the country, where law enforcement was being urged to not engage with ICE and not help ICE. And so through that kind of activism and involvement, we can create the change we want to see. And I totally agree, simply voting for someone who has a platform that we agree with, even partially, is not going to be enough. We need to stay alert, we need to be on guard, and we need to stay active so we can create the change that we need.
I agree, that's great work, and it was Black Lives Matter activism in the streets that had nothing to do with elections that actually moved the country another little step away from racism and impacted every candidate's platform and registered tons of voters in the process. So we have to get on to the other 99% of the work there is to do once you have an election.
David, Peace Iowa has for several years had a big concern with Middle East policy. And of course, that's been a heavy duty thing under Trump and his son-in-law. I don't know if you've got any premonitions about where a Biden government might go on that, or and I feel kind of lost because a two-state solution doesn't seem to be geographically viable anymore. So do you have some thoughts on how we support Palestine and Israel in going forward?
Well, I think you're right regarding the two states. I think that the reason that Trump imposed sanctions on the officials at the International Criminal Court was half because it was investigating all parties in Afghanistan, and half because it was threatening to investigate Israeli crimes in Palestine. I think international law needs to be made international and not simply a tool for prosecuting Africans. I think that Biden needs to hear loud and clear that, one of his first moves needs to be to stop punishing the International Criminal Court and encourage it, in fact, to do its job. And we can demand that the United States join it, though I don't promise a quick victory on that one. But I think we need to work with the Palestinians and peace activists around the world to the extent that we can, and continue moving US public opinion and US officials and US Congress members as they have been moving significantly in recent years. And with nuclear weapons becoming illegal in 50 or more nations this January, we're going to have the opportunity to get lots more money divested from nuclear weapons and push the idea that they're illegal. And that includes the problem of Israel and its nuclear weapons. With, if we can, there's so many things where everyone will say, well, Biden's not going to do it because it's Trump. That's the Trump policy. Biden's going to have the opposite policy. But why can't we do that with things like the military budget? Why can't we do that with things like weapons sales? Why does Biden have to have Trump's military budget, Trump's weapons sales? Why not stop arming nations that, the Congresswoman Omar has a bill in Congress, has for the past couple of years, to stop selling weapons to any countries that abuse human rights. Now, how in the hell you use weapons of war without abusing human rights is a complete mystery to me. But let's go with that pretense that human rights are a purely domestic issue and somehow war is, off the radar. To simply stop dealing weapons to all the most brutal and oppressive governments of the world, except for, the two that they don't, which are Cuba and North Korea, that would be a huge step forward, and it would include Israel. So I think our work has to continue to be educational as well as to be organizing and acting, and where possible in collaboration with our allies in the Middle East.
There's Joe Ossie here. The issue in the Middle East is simply human rights. If the Palestinians were given equal human rights and had the right to vote, if everybody in the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean had equal rights to vote, the problem would be gone. And in that we support Israel or allow them to run amok like they do, then there's no way to get the human rights issue on the table. Second issue is Egypt. We pump all this money into the dictatorship in Egypt. Egypt was working on having its democratic process get started like Tunis did, okay? But, the Tunisian democracy got stopped by economics because there isn't any vision about how to create jobs or how to create a future economy in Tunis. Egypt is in the same shape. And so if you get human rights coupled with economics, so those countries could develop future economic systems instead of being stuck wherever they're at. All of this could go away. But you know, the real issue, as you know, is the jobs, military jobs in the United States, and the money that Wall Street is making off the military budget. I mean, in 1978, during the Carter administration, how many billionaires were there in New York? Okay. Now, since at the end of Carter, the debt was 900 billion. Okay. As soon as Reagan came in, it went up to $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion. So since 1980, the debt in the United States has gone from 1 trillion to 25 or 26 trillion. There's now 600 or more billionaires, and we here in the heartland have gotten poorer. So, you know, we're saddled with a huge problem, as you point out. So the question becomes how to organize on a national level to get this megamaniac system under control. And, you know, we need to be pushing to become a part of the international court. I mean, who the hell are we protecting besides all these criminals in Washington?
Well, I agree with you 1,001%, with the exception of the use of the word we. I don't, you know, bash the International Criminal Court. I don't support Israel. The U.S. government, which does not represent me or most of us or form any sort of non-oligarchic representative government in any way, does these things. And, you know, I actually wrote a book last year called 20 Dictators Currently Supported by the United States. If you look at the most oppressive governments of the world, the US military arms and or trains and or funds the militaries of 96% of them, right? This is the normal relationship of the US government with dictators. So when a president says he'll meet with the leader of North Korea, or a presidential candidate says something less than murderous about Fidel Castro and everybody freaks out, I mean, these are better than the normal policy, which is to arm, train, and fund their militaries. But if you
Saudi
look
Arabia at the top of your list, was Saudi Arabia the #1 country?
I actually did not rank them in degrees of evilness, but you could feel free to do so. It certainly is #1 in some categories of weapons purchases. It certainly is #1 in various measures of human rights abuses. I picked out of the top 50 oppressive governments, 20 that were very clearly dictators, because there are all forms of oppressive governments. And I included Saudi Arabia as a dictatorship. I think one thing I wanted to mention, if you saw this movie that came out recently called We Are Many, about the biggest day of peace activism or any activism in world history, which was February 15th, 2003, with marches around the world to prevent the war on Iraq. Marches and a movement that accomplished a long list of good things, but everyone declared an utter failure because the war in Iraq happened. One of the hundreds of good things that came out of that activism was the people of Egypt being inspired and being shamed to see the infidels in Europe caring about the mass murder of people in the Middle East. And they built a movement that eventually overthrew the dictator of Egypt. Now they got a military coup and they got a long ways to go, and you know they haven't fixed everything in Egypt, but they see themselves as a branch of a global anti-war movement. And I don't think we need to organize nationally. I think we need to organize globally. And so World Beyond War is forming local chapters in towns and cities and counties, provinces, regions around the globe, so that we can work better together, because the weapons corporations do this. And we're far better able to push for closing a military base when we've got people near it, and people near Washington, D.C., and people near other centers of power and all around the world. You know, obviously, taking away the financial power of the war profiteers is the big game. And obviously converting to green energy and non-murderous industries is so beneficial just economically, never mind morally and environmentally, that everybody can be assisted in the process, nobody loses the job, etc. But it's almost unheard of, and there hasn't been, a real serious effort to do it in Congress in years. I think the other best approach for tackling the U.S. military and its buildup and its recruitment is free college. I think free college is hated within the walls of the Pentagon more than Iran or North Korea or anything. I mean, people tell me I hate the troops because I want to end war. I actually want to do the troops some favors. I want to give them the choice of free college and let them choose. Don't you love the troops that much? So. And that's something that's on the agenda. That's something that's happening at the state and local level. That's something that we can make happen in Congress, and we can demand of this new administration is to make college part of public education. Why in the world not? Countries that don't have shiny new wars every couple of years have done it, and it seems to work out well for them.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Alexandra, and I'm just gonna say that I'm a student. I'm studying journalism, and so, like, full disclosure, I'm here, but I'm also interested in this topic. I have two questions. I'll ask them one by one. The first one is, how do you respond when you're critical of, like, anyone who's critical of Israel or Israel's relationship with the US tends to get labeled anti-Semitic from the level of just a private citizen all the way to academics, politicians. It's sort of this very murky area. And I was just wondering that since you all are very experienced in this type of critique, how do you kind of avoid that trap and how do you respond to that?
Well, as you know, Jeremy Corbyn, who should be Prime Minister of England, was just booted out of the Labour Party for alleged anti-Semitism, which did not exist. The guy's been, an anti-racist, anti-bigot, pro-peace, pro-human rights, and informed and engaged and active and courageous and intelligent since before I was born, right? So I don't necessarily have an easy answer for how do you avoid being destroyed by phony charges of anti-Semitism, because they got Corbyn, right? They've got, heads on the wall, a mile long, and he's the latest. But I think it's worth attempting to communicate with people that, first of all, freedom of speech is a key value in the United States. When people claim that the United States is a big leader on human rights and democracy and its values and its principles, shouldn't freedom of speech be in there? And shouldn't criticism of foreign governments be in there when criticism of the US government is in there? And that governments and peoples are not the same thing. That a government is a monstrosity, and the population of a country is a bunch of wonderful human beings and brothers and cousins and sisters and aunts, right? They're two completely different things. This is why I don't like to say we support the Israeli government, because I don't. The US government supports the Israeli government. I don't, so I think we have to get people making that distinction. That the United States is founded on myth. When I talk about ending wars, the most common objection I get is, what about Hitler? What about killing Jews? Right? As if war is somehow the antithesis of Hitler and killing Jews, right? And when I ask people, can you name a war that was justified, right? This enterprise that we spend $1 trillion a year on, where 3% of that could end starvation on Earth, when we're killing more people with where we divert the money than through the wars. Can you name a single one that's justified, that's justifiable, that should have happened? 99 times out of 100, somebody says World War II, and I say why, and they say Holocaust, right? But during World War II and prior to World War II, the peace activists, our ancestors, were demanding that the Jews be brought out of Germany. And Hitler was promising to put them all on luxury cruise ships and send them anywhere that would take them. And the nations, governments of the world were holding conferences and announcing that they wouldn't take them for shamelessly anti-Semitic reasons, didn't want them. And peace activists were meeting with the State Department and with the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom and saying, take them out. And they were being told, we don't have enough planes, we don't have enough ships, even after Dunkirk, we can't do it. And privately, they were saying to each other, if we did that, the Hitler would say yes, and they'd want to send all the Jews out of all the countries of Eastern Europe, and as well as Germany and Austria and Poland, and nobody would want them. Who would take them? It would be a great embarrassment. So we're not going to do it, right? And the people in the death camps were watching the bombers go over, praying for their own demise, hoping to be bombed to end the existence of those camps. And the bombers were bombing nearby targets, right? Never the death camps, right? There was never a single military or diplomatic effort made to save anyone whatsoever. And the whole myth that the Great Resistance and anti-fascism has something to do with saving the Jews from the Nazis was invented long after World War II. Right. And the fact that people think otherwise is just an incredible condemnation of an education system that thinks it's in its interest to forbid criticizing the Israeli government. How about forbid ignorance? How about educate people? That might be wiser.
My other question is for if you're new to sort of the idea of like wanting to end all wars, like you talked about, America is built on myth. And the whole rhetoric of the last several wars has always been into the public about protecting our interests and preserving liberty and freedom. And it really riles people up because people who want to feel patriotic want to feel devoted. And then so they support whatever war is happening. So how do you begin to educate the average person who really has no clue? And what would be some resources that you would tell someone to start out with?
Maybe I should put a link in the chat while I'm talking, because I wrote something on this topic relatively recently that I think might be helpful. I'm just searching for it because I think a lot of people don't know a lot of facts, and others just don't put them together. I've got a link now, and I'm going to the chat room, and everyone paste. I think it's worth pointing out to people that the United States spends on protecting itself from terrorists about as much as the whole rest of the world spends on militarism put together. And most of the rest of the world is US allies and weapons customers. And if Canada or Mexico wanted to generate, anti-Mexican terrorist networks in the Middle East or Asia or Africa, Canada or Mexico would have to go and bomb and invade and kick in doors and occupy numerous countries to generate that, right? I think I've got a link in that article that I've put in the chat to a long list of top US military officials who within a week or so of retirement start talking about how what they were doing was counterproductive. And there is no question that most, if not all of it, is counterproductive. You are generating enemies. The war on terror predictably increased global terrorism year after year for numerous years. Virtually all suicide bomb attacks, terrorist attacks by foreigners to a nation are motivated and publicly declared to be motivated by opposition to a foreign occupation of some other country. There has yet to be a single terrorist attack anywhere on earth driven by anger and resentment at providing food or water or medicine or clean energy or international cooperation, all of which would cost a tiny fraction of what is being spent generating enemies, right? So, when you're digging a hole, you stop digging, right? When you're doing something counterproductive that, generates the terrorism, why wouldn't you stop doing it unless the terrorism is very much appreciated as a marketing tool for buying yet more weapons, right? And so if the purpose is to have enemies, and if having enemies generates weapons sales, then things are going, beautifully. But if the purpose is actually to reduce violence in the world, as Noam Chomsky always said, there's a quick and easy solution to reducing terrorism: stop engaging in it, right? War is rich people's terrorism. There's not a moral or practical difference. It's just bigger weapons, right? And terrorism is not justifiable, but it is predictable. You can stop doing what produces it.
We have this huge consumption of oil, and the Pentagon is the world's largest polluter. The Pentagon buys and burns more oil than any single entity in the world. So they buy the oil to produce the weapons, to consume the oil, to produce the oil, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's one of the issues that needs to be brought into that conversation, because war and the Green New Deal are opposites of each other, as everybody knows. Anyway.
Yeah,
I would like to actually answer Alexandra away and work off of the comments that you've made about education, educating our troops, education in general. We can't forget how much the military is invested in education. And while they spend a lot of money here right at our own university, our own backyard, people talk about, divesting, getting the university to move from petroleum, as Mr. Aosi says, that has got to be something we do. But at the same time, it's very quiet how much the university depends on military money to create the weaponry or create the viable equipment for the soldiers so that they can survive in these various and sundry wars. And so long as the university itself is so invested in supporting the military, or being supported by the military, they're not going to take a strong stand. So there's a lot to unpack in the whole notion of our education system, because our educational system itself supports the military, and thus secondarily many of the things that have been addressed. And so I think we have to actually address the whole notion of our educational system, how it works.
I couldn't agree more. And World Beyond War is forming chapters at universities, including University of Virginia down the street here. There's a group of students who are working on not just take down the pro-war statues, not just divest the university's investments that are in weapons companies, but also stop taking money from the military for the university, stop running a research park with the US Army for weapons companies, stop collaborating in all of these different ways, and stop functioning as a top supplier of recruits for the CIA and all of these agencies that the University of Virginia does. And I also agreed with everything said about the environment. I mean, this is the thing. If we, to the extent that we can get people who care about the environment or civil liberties or education or poverty or racism or any of these other issues to open up to opposing war, they begin to see the incredible overlap. You know, we did a flotilla with kayaks in front of the Pentagon with banners that said no more war for oil, no more oil for wars, because it's both. And, you know, it's not a chicken or an egg, right? I mean, the wars were first. The obsession with the oil in the Middle East was a British Navy's obsession to fuel their ships for war. So it's something that we have to form a bigger coalition on, and make more people willing to talk about. I see Martha's hand. I don't think I can see most people, so I'm sorry if I don't see your hand.
I just wanted to add also, as far as education, it even goes, you know, starts in high school and even younger with the different military recruiters. They're on campus often. And even my son, he, you know, went and thanked them for their service, but told them, you should be ashamed of yourselves for being here trying to recruit students into the military. But it starts even younger than at the university level.
It does, and it's one of a handful of reasons I think that there's only one country on the planet that hasn't ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we're in it. It's not legal anywhere else in the world to be recruiting children into a military.
When you buy a 6-shooter for a 3-year-old kid and put a pair of holsters on his sides and a cowboy hat on, there's where it starts.
G.I. Joe action figures.
Yeah, it's a culture of war and violence, and it's not human nature. It's not humanity. It's, you know, it's not move the U.S. government, you know, 10% of the way toward where all the other governments are on militarism, and it'll be the hugest step ever. You know, so this 4% or less of humanity is a culture. It's not, you know, a species. There have been human cultures that couldn't even understand violence, much less engage in it, where murder was just incomprehensible. And we have, you know, kids brought up on cartoons where they see, you know, fun animals murdering each other, you know, every 16 seconds or whatever. There was an article today from a think tank about NATO that said if NATO doesn't reach the younger generations, it won't be able to continue to exist. You know, well, they're telling young people they have the power to eliminate NATO if they'll get their act together and work on it, right?
Mm-hmm. And he was complimenting Trump earlier.
Something about complimented Trump earlier?
You stroked him for supporting withdrawal from NATO.
Trump has never remotely supported withdrawing from NATO, but the media has depicted him as a threat to NATO and as someone who's ready to destroy NATO. And if he were, I would be in agreement, because of course I am for eliminating NATO. And you know, but what Trump has actually done is tell all the NATO member countries they're not spending enough on weapons. They're not doing their share. They're not pulling their weight. And the result has been, for most of them, spending more money on weapons. That Trump may think that's a good outcome. I don't. You know, Trump wants to pull troops out of Germany to punish Germany. I want to pull troops out of Germany to be nice to Germany. The German public wants the troops out of Germany to be nice to Germany. Sometimes you agree on, you know, on the action, but not on, you know, the rhetoric.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to discussing Israel, if you never mention Israel and you never mention the words that create anti-Semitism, but always talk about the situation talk about the Palestinians, whatever. You can avoid that problem of dealing with the so-called anti-Semitism. Just don't mention the words.
Thanks. This is sort of a silly idea, but we talked about the public and approaching it from like the educational standpoint. But since it's all about these sort of bankers and other entities making tons and tons of cash, I wonder if there's a way that like some really savvy tech and finance people can be enticed into getting into the green energy and to be able to sort of market the Green New Deal to those people who don't really care about things like morality and logic. And you know what I mean? Like, is that sort of happening already or no?
Well, most companies want to make money, and most of them are going to be delighted if they make money from something else, just the same. So when this, by the way, I noticed I've got another call in 3 minutes, but when this pandemic started and a little teeny bit of money started coming out, this, weapons company in Maine that makes these big warships for the US military, they were told, we need you to work with this other little company in Maine that makes some sort of swabs for testing for coronavirus, and dangled some money in front of them. And within days, you had 6 different companies all lined up, cooperating, working together, manufacturing healthcare products instead of weapons, on a small scale. But there's absolutely nothing about it that could be done on a large scale. I mean, it's a conversion from war to peace was done on a large scale after World War II, not nearly the larger scale as needed, but it was done. And every time it's been done, there hasn't been any problem with it. How to do it and how much money you save in the process so you can retool and retrain and make sure nobody's hurt in the transition. We don't need to know how to do it. We need the political will to do it. Several years back, there was this, looming threat. They're going to cut the military budget, and states like Connecticut started doing studies with industry and labor and environment and everybody. How do we convert to peaceful industries just for economic reasons? It's very clear, and they've figured it out. And this is how you would get a Green New Deal. And we and everyone involved would be better off in numerous ways. There wouldn't be any downside that I'm aware of.
I want to mention there's an economist by the name of Michael Hudson. And I don't know how many of you have read Michael Hudson, but he does a good job of presenting alternative economies and talking about creative economics. So it's worth your time, whoever wants to read about economics. Michael Hudson does a good job on it.
He does. I'm sorry I have another call in 30 seconds, but I wish you guys luck. You have great questions, and I think you're going to do great work. So keep in touch.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, David.
Session, love it.
Okay.
Thank you all for being here and being so patient. And my apologies to Mel and all the others who got stuck in the waiting room. It was not a good thing. And I apologize for that.
Thanks, John.
You did your best.
Marvelous, John.
Thank you.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Very informative.
Thank you, John.